Hey Bat fans, Luke here, back with our next installment of Batmas 2020, and today we're going to take a look at the story Batman Sword of Azrael. This was actually just a 4-issue kind of mini-series that kind of told the story, and it was done by some names that you probably will recognize. Denny Neal actually doing the art, and then Joe Quesada. Joe Quesada, obviously, with Marvel, you kind of get that name. Kind of tell this story of this character named Azrael. So, Azrael, also we know today, is a key component of this story that some of you might also know, Batman Nightfall. The multi-story arc epic that kind of tells the story of Bane, who breaks the bat, and ultimately Batman recovers to ultimately kind of reshape the impacts of what Bane did. But oddly enough, if you read Nightfall, the person who actually took down Bane was not actually Batman. It was actually Azrael acting as Batman. So technically I just said a redundant statement. Yes, Batman took down Bane, but it was not Bruce Wayne who did it. It was actually Jean-Paul Valley. And if you read kind of Nightfall, you'll see the degradation of the character, who kind of takes it from initially someone who has good aspirations, but over time kind of goes more to the extreme and kind of violates some of the core Batman tenets. While acting as the Batman with the cape and cowl. So, but Azrael, again, important in that story. And to Danny O'Neill's credit, we kind of needed some sort of introduction to that character. And this kind of serves the story as the introduction, the origin story of the character we would know as Jean-Paul Valley with Azrael. It's also, again, kind of sets the stage for Nightfall. Not necessarily required reading to be put in context for Nightfall, but I think it might be some sort of, not necessarily is a bad word. I think it's good supplemental reading to get the character of Jean-Paul Valley, especially if you're kind of new to Batman, you're walking in. Even today, the versions we see, you've seen kind of a close sort of, it had a different take on it, but you've seen something of a kind of explanation of the Azrael character in the Shangar Murphy book Curse of the White Knight. But before that, you really didn't get too much of a fleshing out of the origin. And it might kind of help if you kind of read this, if you're going in, again, no really background of Azrael the character, and especially if you're going in the Nightfall. It's we're going to get kind of put the character in context, understand really what the person's all about, and why does Azrael the character do what he does. Because it might just seem out of the ordinary that this person, as you read Nightfall, obviously, that, again, kind of violating the core tenets of Batman, being ultra violent and just seeing unremorseful. And if you don't have the context for what this thing called the system is, and you kind of get a fleshing out of that system concept here, it might seem a little disconnected. But again, this kind of gives you some more context. So I give Denny O'Neil credit in that he's trying to provide some sort of context into the character going into Nightfall. You kind of look at a comparison, the Bane one-shot, the origin of Bane, beating into Nightfall itself. I think that was done a little bit more better with Chuck Dixon. But at the same time, Denny O'Neil did the same type of thing here with Azrael. And this one, actually, this version I have here, actually opens up with a short couple-page kind of introduction by Archie Goodwin. He was actually an editor at DC Comics at the time. He actually was the editor of this 4-issue mini-series. And it kind of gives, again, kind of like the context of what was happening at the time, the talent they created for it. Now all the stars kind of lined, right? I thought it was really interesting. So if you get it and it has this kind of introduction, read it. But ultimately, what we find out with Azrael, again, I don't think it's going to really be too far in depth of a review, mainly because I don't want to sit there and spoil everything. But this is really not a complex story. It's really not, if you look at it. But basically what happens is that we open up and then you actually see what turns out to be the death of Azrael. And before Azrael kind of passes on, you see this individual talking to a son who is Jean-Paul Valley, pretty much on his deathbed, basically saying, hey, you know, I am Azrael, and I need you to kind of take this package that has for you. It kind of gives instructions on what you need to do going ahead. Again, Azrael, Jean-Paul Valley, I'm sorry, not getting the full context of what's happening. But that, again, that's kind of just serves the introduction. And you have to understand, Azrael, what is Azrael? Well, actually, Azrael is kind of like the enforcer of this thing called the Order of Saint Dumas. And the Order of Saint Dumas kind of goes back to the Knights Templar, going way back in time. But eventually, the Order, what it's done, it kind of morphed away from what the Knights Templar is doing. And then through the Crusades, they got really rich. They kind of broke off onto a thing unto itself. So the order is still active, but Azrael, again, is kind of like the enforcer, their guardian, their protector, and provides vengeance on their behalf, basically. And basically what happens is this concept of Azrael, it's not like a one person, one entity thing. It's something that carries on from generation to generation by a person. In this case, as you see, the original, or not the original, the first Azrael in this story, passing it on to Jean-Paul Valley. Again, it's kind of shown that, again, his father probably did the same thing, and their father before that. But again, how it's kind of done is this thing called the system. And what the system is kind of like it's like a mental, I'm trying to think the right word, manipulation, where it's kind of, you're subliminally throughout your life, especially early on, you're fed these concepts and techniques and beliefs that at some point you can kind of trigger it, or you actually become this Azrael character. So that's that thing. If you hear the system, that's basically what it is. That is how the Azrael moniker is passed on from generation to generation. Kind of sort of like, without the real trigger, if you remember New 52, what Scott Snyder had, is that way where had that machine that kind of gives Batman, as they create new Batman over time with all the memories and the concepts from one Batman to the other. It's sort of similar like that, but again, without really the kind of like the trigger, almost like the Batman of Zero type thing. There's like a trigger where an exit. It's sort of like that in a way. So Jean-Paul Valley, this is someone, again, it's not very, it doesn't seem like the person you would think be Azrael, but again, if you kind of understand the concept of the system, it kind of makes sense how it can kind of be applied. But initially, as you see, as that Azrael, the first Azrael in the story dies, it kind of brings Batman's attention, because during that death, it actually caused a whole bunch of chaos and other civilian deaths in downtown Gotham. There's actually a parade at the time. So that obviously then creates Batman to make some interest into this case. You see some detective work with some forensics being done on obviously the evidence found at the scene, which kind of connects the dots of someone that they kind of get a gist who might be involved, which actually leads to them chasing him down across the globe. With that, there is someone who kind of mentors Jean-Paul around, Jean-Paul Valley. I didn't really get the name. I'm sorry, Numas, there it is. He kind of looks like a little troll. And he's basically the person that's kind of guiding a little more sternly at some points Azrael through this transition to his assumption of the Azrael moniker. But you do find someone, there's a twist in this story that kind of facilitates Azrael's transition to it, and there's someone within the order that has taken some money onto themselves, which is actually the person who actually killed the first Azrael in the story. And I always have trouble kind of pronouncing the name, but it's Lehne, Lehne. I believe you're spelled correctly. And this person, when he does that, when he actually kills Azrael, you see sort of a transition into himself, where you actually have the opposite effect as Azrael. You actually have this concept of a other god. Again, I kind of have trouble pronouncing this one right. It's Bis, B-I-I-S, which is again kind of like the opposite of Azrael, who would be ultimately like Azrael's ultimate foe, you know, the Joker to Batman. And this person is ultimately Lehne, L-E-H-E, whatever, actually becomes subsumed into this character, where it's not really, we can't really tell, it's kind of implied, it's sort of like an omnipresent being who kind of possesses this person, but you really can't tell if it's a kind of a mental thing or not. But ultimately this person thinks he is now the great Bis, this new god that's going to rival Azrael in the Order of Saint Dumas, his previous alliance. And what he's also going to do is take out members of the Order one at a time. And with that, obviously, you can take more money. And caught in between all this is Batman. And you see throughout, again, kind of like the evolution, as you see there, the Lord Demon Bis versus what's going to be Azrael. And part of a lot of the story, again, is Batman kind of tracking down Azrael, and then at some point he does get captured, and it's Alfred teaming with John Paul Valley, and we'll just call him the Troll, lack of a better word, trying to track down, obviously, Bruce Wayne, who is captured by, you know, the great god Bis. And actually, toward the end, Bis actually steals the cape and cowl and actually tries to commit murder while using, you know, the cape and cowl, which kind of triggers Azrael, who kind of knows that Batman's a good person in this. As you see there, you see a cool little couple panels right there. Realizes that, you know, it's not the true Batman, and he goes to stop it. But kind of like the climax into this final issue of the story, you do see kind of like the final switch of the system really taking hold, and kind of like the seeds of, while Azrael, John Paul Valley might be a good person with some good morals, how the system can corrupt it. And actually, in going after that, the Bis, and trying to capture or trying to free Bruce Wayne, he's got to fight all these security guards in this area, and do so just brutally just destroys them, which again is kind of serves as kind of like the seed of something you'll see later in Nightfall. But how a person like John Paul Valley, as you kind of see throughout, well, it's done really quickly, evolves his character as someone, again, kind of innocent and kind of not gullible. I mean, he's actually a grad school student in computer work, but it's obviously not someone that you would think would be Azrael. But again, you kind of see the impact of the system on him, which leads to ultimately that evolution. And you do see ultimately, when it comes down to it, Azrael does defeat the Bis. Again, in a way, might not be in total keeping with the Batman code of conduct, but you do see at the end where you think you have someone who can be Azrael, not necessarily do the bidding of the Order of Saint Dumas, but still keep, you know, John Paul Valley as the core tenet of it. But ultimately, as you know, going into Nightfall, that's not necessarily the case, even to the stories of today. So, all in all, my thoughts on this is that I like it because, again, it kind of gives you, because you really didn't get it before, kind of an origin story for Azrael and John Paul Valley, and fleshes out those things you'll see in Nightfall if you didn't get it before. That thing with the system. it's a very simple story. It's not necessarily something I think that's going to blow you away and just be like, oh my lord, this is the greatest thing I've ever read. No, definitely not on the same level when you look at the comprehensive, holistic look at it. On the same level of Nightfall, but I do see it as again, it's kind of like a little spoke in the wheel of this thing called Nightfall, where a lot of people will tell you Nightfall, it's not necessarily one element of it that's made it such a good event or great event. It's more the collective of the sum of the parts, that when everything brought together and you look at it again holistically, it made it such a good event. Again, this is just one part of it. I think using Denny O'Neil on this project was a good idea, and Joe Quesada's art. I thought Joe Quesada's art was really good. The only thing that's kind of a bummer on this trade is that you see it a couple times. It actually I skimmed through. I've actually marked it. There's a couple times where you see these big spreads where you got to like kind of rotate the book around to kind of read it. I like that, but just the way the binding is done, you get lost. You lose a whole lot of art in the gutter. So if you get like a digital version of this, or if you get, I don't remember, I got the Nightfall Omnibus one, the 3 volumes, and I don't believe this was in there, to be perfectly honest. And obviously in the Nightfall, kind of like the new trade paperbacks they released, the prelude to it, I know they didn't have this. They had the Bane story, but not obviously Nightfall. So in some way, I think you lose someone in this kind of way. It's all collected in single issue version. If you're able to get, I think you will get this full kind of context that Quesada kind of uses throughout in here. But again, just the way that it's binding in this book, you kind of lose some of it in the gutter. So I thought the art was good. I thought the lettering was good. You see cool things throughout here. Just the way some of the lettering is, like depending on who's talking and from what concept, you'll see different color boxes. You'll have a yellow, you have white, then you have you'll see blue, you'll see teal. It's just, it kind of helps again kind of guide the reader along with, really, it's going to sound obvious, yeah, who's reading, obviously, who's speaking, yeah, I got that. But I just like how it's done, because there's some parts of, especially when there's, you think that you're reading it's present day, but it's actually sort of someone from a flashback perspective telling it in current time. Again, it just kind of helps kind of guide it along with, especially with the context of the flow of the story being told. Again, simple story, nothing complex. I guess some of the things I didn't like it as much as you read this. The ending, while you do get an ending, it just feels like it could have been flushed out a little bit more. You just kind of think they've kind of left the door open for that Biss character to kind of go. But there's really no fallout to it. And correct me if I'm wrong, that basically everything that happened with Jean-Paul basically wiping out all those guards in there, killing them, impaling them with the sword of Azrael. There's really no retribution to it, or kind of consequences to it. It just seemed like there was more story to be told there, which this would have been probably a better place for it. But again, you get it, it's an ending, it's there, it wraps up. But to me, I think there was probably some more meat to the bone that they could have put on there. But all in all, it's a good story. Again, it gives you more context behind the Azrael character. Not necessarily required reading for Nightfall, but again, it kind of provides some of that context to it, which better understand, especially when you get the post when Batman got his back broken, especially on when kind of Azrael's kind of teaming up with Robin, and you see those seeds of Azrael taking things to the extreme. This again kind of informs that a little bit, but it's a simple story. It's simple. It's gonna pull on your nostalgia a little bit, those classic 90s Batman tales, an overall fun read. But again, it's just not just like, oh my god, this is great. I'm gonna give it a I'll say a 3.25 out of 5, almost a 3.5. Mainly because, again, it's a simple story, nothing really layered, but still good for what it is. So anyway, those are my thoughts on Batman: The Sword of Azrael. Hit me up in the comments below if you've read this. Love to bat chat with you about it, and we'll go from there. So until next video, take care.